Hey everyone, it's Pettin from Daydream Nation, and I've got the Parish of Rock back to the channel. How are you, Parish?
I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, glad to be back. Looking forward to this as always.
Absolutely. Today's episode, we are doing our favorite clone bands. It's where an artist has based their whole career on the sound of another artist, or maybe they've done an album that sounds so much in the wheelhouse of another band. Bands that we're going to be talking about tonight are Van Halen, Def Leppard, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin. So I'll throw it over to you, Mr. Parish of Rock. What is your first pick? And we'll take it from there.
Well, my first pick, I'm going to go with the very first one that sprang to mind when you messaged me about doing this show. And it's Cinderella. I don't know if you can see that. These are my old cassettes, Cinderella and AC/DC. And I've picked those two cassettes particularly because I remember back in 90 having both of those cassettes, playing them on my Walkman as I walked the dog, and I had young children. I pushed them around in the pushchair to get them to sleep, and I was regularly playing the two albums. And to me, the sound is almost interchangeable. Now, you could argue it's mostly the vocals, and I wouldn't disagree with that. Tom Kiefer's voice is very similar to Brian Johnson's. In fact, at first I thought he was purposely mimicking Brian Johnson, but I think over the years I've learned actually that is just how he sounds. That it's not a deliberate copy. It's got a very similar vocal style. But both albums very similar to me. Both came out about the same time. I'm not sure exactly when the Cinderella one came out. Was it 89, was it, or 90? It was about that time anyway. Let's see if I can see on here.
88 or 89?
Yeah. But I certainly had them both at the same time and was playing them at the same time. I think the other similarity is the bluesiness between AC/DC and Cinderella. I mean, maybe by 90, AC/DC had lost a little bit of their bluesiness, but it was still there. And certainly you've got that kind of blues hard rock similarity. And then also the riffs. I mean, not just on Long Cold Winter, but also on the first album, Night Songs, and subsequent albums. I mean, they are a riff band. I mean, I know they get sort of lumped in with hair metal because of the look they had on the first album, but certainly the sound I never really thought sounded like those other hair metal bands. I thought they were a very distinctive hard rock band, or distinctively a hard rock band. And the riffs on the first two albums in particular, I think are very, very heavy, sort of AC/DC type riffs. A big similarity there. So I won't go through the two albums because it's not just the albums that are similar. It is the overall sound, I think. And a bit later, they moved a little bit more towards, I think, the Rolling Stones on the next couple of albums. With Heartbreak Station again, I've got my cassettes out.
Oh, what a great album!
And Still Climbing. Yeah, both brilliant albums. I think all four albums are fantastic, and the albums Tom is releasing under solo, I think, have been really good in the last decade as well. So fantastic, fantastic band. But I think those latter two start to move a little bit more into the Rolling Stones type sound. But there's still riffs a lot on those. But in particular, the first album, and I would say the one I've picked, which is Long Cold Winter, along with putting it up with AC/DC's Razor's Edge, I would say very similar albums, and they are clones, particularly because of the vocals and the riffs, I would suggest.
Yeah, look, that's a great start to the show. A little bit of trivia. The drummer on Cinderella, Fred Coury, didn't actually play until the third and definitely to the fourth album. He wasn't really studio savvy. I think he was just, he wasn't really right for recording. And Cozy Powell actually plays on Long Cold Winter, and you can actually hear it. The little Cozy Powell with the snare, the sharp snare sound.
I thought for a moment I thought for a moment there you were going to say it was Phil Rudd.
No, no. So that's a point of difference, I think, but with AC/DC, because AC/DC's got that very meat
Yeah,
and potatoes, four on the floor. But you can hear a little bit of, there's a bit more flash in the drumming in Cinderella, but it's not Fred Coury. It's
yeah,
Cozy Powell, and I think there's some other drummers on that, but it's definitely not Fred. But that's a great choice, and it's the vocals that really are the
definitely.
sonics and the guitar sound, very sort of meat and potatoes. Yeah. All right. Fantastic. My first pick is Kingdom Come with Led Zeppelin. So Led Zeppelin, along with Def Leppard and AC/DC, were just a wonderful well of that bands used to mine because they were successful, and it was a great template for hard rock in the 80s, wasn't it? Led Zeppelin, I mean, you had bands like Great White, Whitesnake 1987, Tip My Hat. Led Zeppelin was like, a bit of a template for rock and roll gold. But nothing was as blatantly ripped off as this particular album, Parish. Kingdom Come, they were an established band. They're German, which I didn't know they were German until much later. I actually assumed they were maybe English or at least American. I didn't know they were German. Lenny Wolf's vocals were very plant-esque, that sort of helium. They had a great guitarist in Danny Stagg that had that Jimmy Page kind of swagger and, had the sort of licks. And James Connick on drums, a little bit, Bonham-esque, a bit more meat on the double on the bass drum. And I believe he joined Scorpions. No longer with us; he passed away. But as a band, they were really tight, and a lot of these songs, like "Get It On." I've got a radio show I do for Daydream Nation in Melbourne, and it's my theme song. I love it because it just rips off Led Zeppelin, and it to me it's an 80s modernized version of Kashmir, and that was the single, and it's so damn hooky. And the songs on this album, Living Out of Touch, Pushing Hard, The Shuffle, they're a bit more up tempo. They're a little bit more I wouldn't say modern, but they're a bit more, sort of, if the dial was on hard rock and heavy metal, maybe towards a little bit more heavy metal, Led Zeppelin, but there's so much Zeppelin-esque in the riffage, in the playing, in the sonics. It's a bit of a rip-off, but it's a great rip-off, and I love it. It's just, yeah. Have you got this album?
I have, and the thing about it, I think, is, and I think it's the case with quite a lot of these bands that I like, which are clones, is because the original isn't about anymore. So it's how do you get that sound if you can't listen to the original? And so when bands do it really well, I mean, I nearly went as an example with Rhino Bucket for AC/DC, because they are to me the best sounding Bon Scott AC/DC by another band. Certainly that first album. And the reason for it is because there wasn't a Bon Scott AC/DC anymore. And it's the same thing, I think, with this band, that there isn't a Led Zeppelin. So therefore you've got to look at who was doing something similar that was not, maybe not quite as good, but near as damn it. And yeah, I think it's a great album.
It is indeed, and it did reasonably well in America. I think it went platinum, perhaps, reached number 12 in the charts. And there was a period in the mid to late 80s where anything that was kind of in the wheelhouse of Led Zeppelin was radio gold, and it was a lot of cha-ching. So I'll never put a shout out for Bob Rock. So this is if you're familiar with the production work of Bob Rock, this has got the Bob Rock sound, big drum sound, a lot of bottom end, very glossy. It's the Bob Rock sound. Bob Rock to me is the 80s when it comes to albums, metal albums.
Yeah, but without having an 80s, it doesn't sound dated, does it? His albums, they still seem pretty good.
because the melodies are rooted in heritage in the classic
Yeah.
rock of Led Zeppelin. So
Mm.
there you go. All
Good
right.
choice.
What's your next pick, pal?
Well, my next pick is maybe going to be a bit more controversial. Controversial as in I mentioned. I'll come on to who it is in a minute. But to me, I've always thought this band sounds like the band that I think they're a clone of. I love them to death. In fact, I saw them recently when they came over to the UK. But I mentioned to my two sons who are grown up now that I was going to pick this band, and they couldn't see it. They cannot see any similarity. Well, they can see some, but they definitely didn't see him as a clone band. So the band I'm talking about that is cloned is Van Halen from the Sammy Hagar era. So it's the Sammy Hagar era Van Halen. And the band, and in particular the album I'm talking about, is Mr. Big. And the album is the Lean Into It album. And from the moment I bought this, I thought it sounded like late 80s Van Halen. I think that Eric Martin's vocals are interchangeable with Sammy Hagar's vocals on those Van Halen albums. This is how I hear them. I'm sure people are going to put a lot of comments down that they disagree, but as I hear them, they're interchangeable. It could be, to me, Sammy Hagar singing on that album. The same tone, the same manner of singing, the kind of the noises that Sammy makes when he's, sort of halfway through a song. I'm not going to try to imitate them, but Eric Martin to me is doing exactly the same stuff. So the first thing again is the vocals. The songs I think sound very, very, very Van Halen. It kicks off with Daddy, Brother, Lover, Little Boy. That to me could be a Van Halen song. The riffing, the speed of it, the guitar work. And of course, you've got with Paul Gilbert, a guitar hero who maybe not as big a name as Eddie Van Halen, but I would say is as good a guitarist, as great a guitarist as I mean, they're a super group, aren't they? So they bring that excellence to it. And I think Paul Gilbert's excellent. Billy Sheehan on the bass. Yeah, again, I think there's similarities with Michael Anthony, and the drumming, Pat Torpey on the drums, and Alex Van Halen. So the musicianship sounds very similar. The songs to me are of a similar style. You've got those hard hitting songs, but you've also got a few ballads. You've got the more melodic rock, almost poppy sound in there. And to me, at the time, I actually preferred Mr. Big than I did to Van Halen at that point of Van Halen's career. I've come to like the Sammy Hagar years much more later. But to me, I feel as if Mr. Big is the best album that Van Hagar made. It just happened not to be made by them. It was made by Mr. Big. But their first album, I think, is, there's a lot of similarity in the first album. Maybe not on some of the later stuff, but those first two albums, again, I think there's a huge similarity. And to my ears, definitely a clone band of Van Halen, but an excellent band nonetheless.
I've never thought about it, but you've convinced me.
Yeah, well, listen again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely in the same universe, isn't it? Really?
Yeah,
absolutely. Well done. Yeah, I like that. My next one is actually an album which mines the world of AC/DC, and I'm talking about the 1986 album from the cult Electric. So when this came out, it was so obviously mining the well of AC/DC. The songs had that sort of really meat and potatoes, dry Rick Rubin production, and just the power chords. So you can imagine AC/DC, banging out some of these tunes, but, Love Removal Machine, Wildflower, Little Devil. I saw the tour. This is an interesting band because they evolved. They started off very gothic and, alternative. And then it sort of evolved into this, sort of AC/DC band. And then with the following album, you could say that they were mining Queen with Sonic Temple. You know, it had that AC/DC, but it was going into a more arena, bombastic sound, and Queen, Led Zeppelin, whatnot. But to me, for the purposes of this show in Clones, the Cold Electric, it was just so into that meat and potatoes. And I think it's because of the Rick Rubin's production being dry, you could actually hear the space between the notes and the chords. You know, like those some AC/DC albums, you can almost hear the nanosecond where there's just nothing. And that's why I think that's the secret to AC/DC's success, where there's space between the notes, there's air that punctuates a lot of their music, and it makes them the point of differentiation with a lot of other metal bands where there's just notes everywhere. And I think they were onto a winner with this because it charted well, did really well in America. As I said, I saw them twice in Australia, and they were definitely a band on the rise. And Ian Astbury is a very charismatic frontman. Billy Duffy is a very charismatic guitarist, a bit of a guitar hero, and they're on the ascendant. So, do you like this album?
I do, and fun enough, I thought of that album and then decided that you were going to probably pick it, so I'd leave it. I don't know if you've ever thought this, but I've always thought it was called Electric because of AC/DC. It was like a tip, Electric, AC/DC, a tip to the influence through the album title, really. So I don't know. I've never heard them say that. That's why they came up with the album title. But it certainly, to me, it sounds as if they're giving the clue by the name of the album, really.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you look at the aesthetics, and we'll put a screenshot of it, the aesthetics are completely worlds apart from AC/DC because they're all in, they're...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they look kind of... they still have that sort of aesthetics of an alternative band, but to me, it's like an alternative band has heard AC/DC and let's put on a show. Let's make a record off the back of it. They've listened to Power Age, and then they listened to Highway to Hell and Back in Black. So I think it's got a bit of the best of the.
There is a bit of a Bon Scott look to him, though, isn't there? He tends to go that sort of bare-chested, long hair, bare-chested sort of look. I mean, maybe not jeans, but certainly there's a bit of a similarity in the look.
I think their foot's more still planted in the alternative.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
And
as you're saying, interesting band if you look at the whole of their catalogue.
And absolutely, and all the people that used to wear skinny jeans and toe picker shoes disown them because like they were people that like the Cult in those early albums probably like the Smiths, and this was probably a step too far. And
this was the album that brought me into them. I didn't like the earlier stuff. I didn't listen to any of that.
Absolutely.
This was definitely the album that got me into them. So
so it was a changing the guard, and that's always interesting, and that's always a risk with bands when they change their sonics and they try something new. They shed fans and pick up new fans, but I think it was probably a point of no return because if you're familiar with the Cult right to the end, I don't think they've ever truly gone back to the alternative, the true, stayed. They flirted with that early Cult sound with the first couple of albums, but they've never truly gone back into that space and stayed there. I think Electric was the point of no return to a certain extent.
Absolutely. Okay, so my next band that I'm going to go with, the band I think they sound like is Def Leppard, this era of Def Leppard. So pre-Pyromania, the first two albums, the sort of new wave of British heavy metal era. And the band I'm going to go with is Heavy Petting.
I love this band.
Came out, to be fair, it came out about the same time. So this came out in '83. So this is almost the album that you would have expected Def Leppard to bring out after this album, although they brought out Pyromania. And I just think it's a cracking album. The vocals are I mean, there's nothing identical, but they do sound like Def Leppard. So the vocals are great. The guitar playing's fantastic. The songwriting's great. The first three songs, In and Out of Love, Broken Heart, Love and the Wrong, are just epic, great songs. But they just, if you've not heard it, for the people who are watching and haven't heard it, it is on Spotify. Listen to it and come back and tell me whether you think it's Def Leppard or not. Because if you didn't know, I think you'd play that and you would think it was a long lost Def Leppard album. I saw them live at the time. They were really, really good live band as well. I'm surprised that they didn't do better, particularly when Def Leppard went off. You know, they're going down the new wave of heavy metal, and then they went off in a different direction, almost leaving a gap, I think, for a band like Heavy Petting. So it's a bit of a surprise they didn't do better, really. But maybe with hindsight, they just sounded a little bit too much like Def Leppard, and maybe there was only a need for one of them. I don't know. But that album, Letting Loose, is just a brilliant album. So definitely worth getting. So that's my third one.
I actually like their follow-up even better. Rock Ain't Dead. And I love that song Dreamtime. And I think the songs on Rock Ain't Dead are a little bit more polished, a little bit better, a bit more songcraft, and it's a bit of a head scratch. They could have been a contender.
And I didn't pick that because I thought they'd slightly moved away from the Def Leppard sound on that second album.
Yeah.
So this is the album. I think it's the clone album, if you like.
Absolutely. I guess I'm just talking from an artistry point of view.
Yeah.
They're still at it. They're still doing it.
They are. They're still going. Yeah.
Absolutely. They almost got to Australia. They were doing a show in Indonesia, and I was madly, I think I might have been messaging the singer, and I said, why don't you come to Australia? You're only in Indonesia. Oh, we're working on some shows. We'll keep you in mind. I thought that was a bit random. This Scottish band, they're playing Indonesia and not playing Australia. That was weird. Anyway, hopefully they'll come down. I love them. And check them out. I've actually done a show with Steve Deluxe, and we did cover Rock Ain't Dead and that other album. So worth checking out. Speaking of a Def Leppard, I am going to talk about a band called BB Steel, which you may not have heard about. So this album is called On the Edge, and this came out in 1991 on the Polydor label. BB Steel was fronted by, it's an Australian band fronted by Craig Songrady, who used to sing in an Australian band called Boss. They are a bit of a pub rock band, similar to Heaven, a little bit of an AC/DC band playing pub rock, heavy metal, and did a lot of supports in the Australian metal scene. Kevin Pratt on guitar, Warren Mason on guitar, and James Young on drums. Now, this band caught the eye of Phil Collen from Def Leppard and was produced by Phil Collen and knocked me down with a feather. Folks, listen to this on YouTube. This is very hard to get. I don't own a copy, but it sounds like Def Leppard's lost album after Hysteria. It is so much like Def Leppard. It's unbelievable. Craig Songrady, I used to see Boss. I've seen him like a dozen times. I used to follow the band, and his voice was very much like a Robert Plant. In this album, he has somehow tailored his vocals to sound like Joe Elliott. And this is remarkable. And when I heard this album, I go, is that really Craig singing? Everything about this album sounds like Def Leppard. There are certain moments that you think, oh, that reminds me of Hysteria. That reminds me of Pyromania. There's even little hints of riffs that sound like Def Leppard. It's a clone album. It's enjoyable. It's beautifully produced. Phil Collen, but, it didn't do anything. It didn't do any business. And it was on, as I said, it was on a major label. the notable songs, if On the Edge, Lizzie Town, Ride On, Live It Up, Precious Love. Check it out on YouTube. If you see a copy, grab it. It's rare. Hopefully it'll get a reissue. Rock Candy or one of those repertoire companies will do it. Parish, have you ever heard of this band?
I haven't, no. When did you say it came out?
1991.
Right, okay, interesting. Yeah, no, never heard it or heard of them.
Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of Adrenalize. I love Pyromania. Hysteria, I like a lot. Adrenalize. I mean, this could have been, if this was the follow-up to Hysteria, because it sounded so much like Def Leppard, it would have been huge.
It makes you wonder then, doesn't it? Because they obviously they didn't have Matt Lung on Adrenalize. And I'm going to talk about an album in a minute, which is similar. Phil Collen obviously is a good producer from what you're saying on that and the album I'm about to talk about.
And he's picked up the techniques.
Yeah, so why didn't he produce them? Why didn't they let I know the band did it as a whole, but why didn't they just let him do it?
Yeah,
it's a mystery, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. But do yourself a favor, Parish,
on
this show. Just listen to one or two tracks and send me an email and tell me.
I will do.
I'm telling you, I just was shocked at how much this sounds like Def Leppard. But hey, don't take this as a criticism. It's, some of these clone bands, these albums are fantastic. If I see it, I'm going to look for it. I'll try to grab a copy, but it's pretty hard to come by. Anyway, BB Steel.
I'll definitely have a listen afterwards.
From 1991. Alrighty. So, what is your next pick?
My next one is, funnily enough, sticking with Def Leppard. Up till now, all of my choices have been from the 80s, funnily enough, whereas this one isn't. It's much more recent. I did go looking for it, and I couldn't find my copy of it. So it came out in 2019, and it's Tesla's album Shock. Now, I know a lot of people, when it came out, reviewed it and said they didn't like it because it sounded too much like Def Leppard. But to me, this is the album that Def Leppard should have made, in recent years. Again, it's produced by Phil Collen. Phil Collen's also got songwriting credits, co-wrote most of the songs on the album as well. Tesla had been touring the States. I think they'd done a few tours with them leading up to this, so there was obviously a good relationship between the bands. I'm a big Tesla fan anyway, and I think if you like Tesla's classic sound, maybe you'll be put off by this because it does sound like Def Leppard, not so much like Tesla. But it's got I think it's just got a great, just great songs on it, really. There are 12 songs in total. We Can Rule the World is fantastic. Shock is fantastic. As I say, these should and could have been on Def Leppard albums. The album did quite well, actually. It got to 21 in the US Billboard. So maybe it would have done anyway. Maybe Tesla still has an element of a fan base, or maybe it was off the back of the touring or the Def Leppard connection. This is a bit of an odd one. It got to number 34 in the Scottish album charts. So quite why it was popular in Scotland and not in England and Wales, I don't know. But it did well in Scotland. So they've obviously got a fan base up there. So, it did reasonably well. Certainly for, modern days for an 80s rock band to hit 21, I would say on the Billboard is a pretty good success. So, yeah, worth checking out if people haven't heard it. The follow-up album is back to sounding more like Tesla. So I think, and certainly the one before was as well. So I think it's a one-off, but yeah, definitely worth listening to if you like Def Leppard. And when I say it sounds like Def Leppard, I'm not talking about modern Def Leppard. I'm talking about a bit like you were, going back to listening to that kind of classic Pyromania, Hysteria kind of era of Def Leppard. That's what it sounds like. And as I said earlier, you wonder when Phil Collen can co-write and produce such great albums, why is he not doing it with Def Leppard? Maybe he does maybe he doesn't get the free rein. Maybe everybody else has a say as well, and therefore he's a voice of one of five rather than a voice of. I suspect Joe Elliott demands and controls a lot of what goes on. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I feel like they're a little bit more united. Maybe there's a slight, he's the leader, slightly, if there's a pecking order, but I get the feel that they're a bit kind of a democracy and they're much more united than a lot of other bands.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean I didn't mean he was a dictator. I just mean that I think. Yeah. I mean, look, the fact that the band has been together all these years, and whoever comes into the band stays with the band. At one point it looked like they might have a revolving door, didn't it, with guitarists, and in comes Vivian Campbell, and and bearing in mind his history with bands, I was surprised. I thought at the time he wouldn't hang around long in Def Leppard, and here he is 30 plus years later and he's still there. So
I think they all get on. I think
absolutely.
I think they all get on, and I think the reason why a lot of the the other band members left, was substance abuse, partying too hard, and lack of discipline when it comes to recording, the musicology side of it. So I think, shape up or ship out. That's the attitude.
Well, and of course, to be fair, it was only really one that applied to, wasn't it? Because Steve Clark obviously sadly passed away. So, but I think you're right. I think they obviously do get on, and there's a strong relationship there. But yeah, great album. Shock again. A bit of an AC/DC link there, isn't there? So we talk about Electric, we talk about Shock. There's people have a listen to these things. Good album.
Well, speaking of AC/DC, my honourable mention, I'm going to pick Night Songs by Cinderella. So you'll see the photo come up. It's an awful album cover. It really looks like hair metal, glammy. You've got the purple smoke, the purple logo, and they're all in their sequins and robes and their glam clothes. But believe me, this is a Trojan horse album. It has got a bit of hard edge, and they've got that AC/DC chordal crunch. And Tom Kiefer is really going for it. And he's actually been his worst enemy because he's had some really severe vocal problems. There was one stage he looked like he wouldn't sing again because of some injuries around his larynx or vocals. But luckily he's got through that. But this album, I can completely understand why it did so well. And a lot of those hair metal bands, other than Motley Crue, kind of peaked at 2 million, 3 million. This did phenomenally well. Just looking it up, I think it went, in respect of the platinum, well, no, it went 3 million. That's a pretty decent for a debut. And it probably helped that they were supporting Bon Jovi. I know if I'd be going to that concert, who I'd be seeing? Cinderella. Night Songs, Shake Me, Nobody's Fool, Nothing for Nothing. I mean, there's a little bit of the convention that they've got to have power ballads, and there's a little bit of the hair metal-y type side of it, but I think it's like 70% AC/DC, 30% hair metal. There's crunch, there's rockcraft, and I think it's the vocals. I think Tom's vocals have that real grit. And the thing that really killed it for him is the name and the imagery. So if they wore street clothes, maybe had a different name, had all the elements. What do you think?
I think it launched them really well for hair metal, both the look and the name. But when hair metal started to die away, unfortunately, they were too associated, because the sound, as I say, earlier, the sound was moving more towards a Stonesy sound, or sort of a heavy rock version of the Stones, maybe a bit of Aerosmith in there. And to be honest, they shouldn't have disappeared like the others, because they were well placed for grunge, I think, coming in, because they had that rockier, less glossy sort of sound to them. But I just think, it helped launch their career, but that association also killed their career. So, Bit of a shame, but
well, Heartbreak Station, if they position themselves like a Black Crows, they could have gone in that alternative laneway.
yeah. I mean,
Exactly, exactly.
I saw them on that tour, and they were absolutely fantastic. And there was no sort of glam rock or sort of hair metal um, hangover to it either. They just looked like a great rock band, you know. Um, so they'd definitely shed that skin by the time that album came out. But yeah, too late,
Yeah.
I think, to save them, unfortunately.
You know what? I think that what really trapped a lot of these hair metal bands, other than the image, was the power ballad. I think a lot of these bands, their biggest hit was a power ballad, which are usually sappy, cliched, um, done by the numbers. If these bands had hits that weren't power ballads and they were rockers and they were like a Satisfaction or like a Rolling Stones
Mm,
type of song, if they were more of a hard rock hit, then I think they may have had more of a career.
yeah, it's actually funny you should say that because you could say the same about some of the AOO bands of the early 80s or late 70s. Foreigner, Styx, REO Speedway. They all got labelled as ballad bands, didn't they? And struggled as the 80s moved on because of that. And I think you're probably right. So a lot of the hair metal got branded as power ballads. And of course, those that did survive it did have the rock hits. So Bon Jovi had power ballads, but they did have rock hits as well with, You Give Love a Bad Name and Living on a Prayer, and you take Guns N' Roses. They definitely were more associated with the rock songs as opposed to the ballads. So those few that managed to step outside it is because they weren't. I think you're right. They managed to have hits which were beyond just a power ballad.
Yeah. I was watching YouTube. There was this particular channel. I forget what it was called. And the guy did a compilation of these grabs of all these power ballads from all these hair metal acts from the years 83 to 89. And it was like 30 songs in a row. And by the end of it, I was like desensitized because it all sounded the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the power ballad killed hair metal along with the fashion, but it's right up there because they were the
Yeah.
songs that they were membered
Yeah.
for. And I think Cinderella, their big hits were the power ballads, like off Night Songs, Nobody's Fool. It's a great song.
Mm.
It's a nice song, but AC/DC wouldn't be doing that. I mean,
No, no, exactly.
so that the 30% of hair metal, because this album to me is 70% meat and potatoes, Aerosmith, AC/DC, 30% hair metal. It's the 30% hair metal that probably killed it for them.
Yeah. And
And
you're right, because you take a band like Extreme, who aren't really a hair metal band but got put into it. Again, More Than Words is what everybody would have known. And therefore, again, similar thing. Yeah,
I heard the song without seeing them visually, and I thought it
yeah,
was like, who are these guys? It's like the Everly Brothers in the in the 90s or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Who are these guys? Yeah, the power ballad. This is a whole different discussion we can talk about, but
yeah.
I definitely
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
that
Different
was like an
show.
albatross
Yeah,
but this band easily could have positioned themselves like a Black Crows or something that was Americana, rootsy. If you position yourself as a classic rock band, you've got longevity. But if you position yourself into a specific genre, the lifespan is a lot shorter. And I'm just wondering if a lot
exactly.
of these bands, even Whitesnake, they'll go back, okay, David Coverdale goes, I've got 10 million sales of 1987. What would I have? Would I have all the millions of that one album, or would I have a steady, moderate career over a period of 30 years. I don't know. Maybe the sugar hit of 10 million albums. I wouldn't mind that. But at the same time, I think he would have liked to have a killer follow-up and longevity and respect to have more albums after that.
Yeah.
That sold as many.
Yeah.
We're off on a tangent here, but
but interesting. I was just thinking, about there's so many bands like that, isn't there? I mean, even to a lesser extent, we've spoken a couple of times about Def Leppard. Even Def Leppard, to a lesser extent, they've never hit the heights again, have they? That they did those Pyromania and Hysteria, because they kind of got grouped into that hair metal sort of association, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there you have it, guys. We've finished the show. We have done clones, and we love these bands, but they are so they have mined their sound, their arrangements, their production on other their influences, and worn it fairly on their sleeves. But we like it. So you can see the Parish of Rock on the Contrarians, plenty of shows. We're going to have the Parish of Rock shortly. I think we're going to do an Aussie. We're going to do an Aussie album battle in a couple of weeks. So check that out, and that'll be fresh around the final show with Aussie and the shows in Birmingham that nobody seems to be able to get a ticket. And we might even have a bit of a chat. I think we're both going to stream the show, and God willing that we can see it and no stuff ups. We might have a little bit of a yarn about the final performances. Please tell us what you think are your favorite clone bands, Def Leppard, Van Halen, AC/DC, Aerosmith. We love to read your comments. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. But one thing's for sure, you'll see me in the Parish doing a show very soon in 2025. All the best, and cheers.